The trials of the Pendle witches in 1612 are among the most famous witch trials in English history and some of the best recorded of the 17th century. The 12 accused lived in the area surrounding Pendle Hill in Lancashire and were charged with the murders of 10 people by the use of witchcraft. All but 2 were tried at Lancaster Assizes on the 18th to 19th of August 1612, along with the Samlesbury witches and others, in a series of trials that have become known as the Lancashire witch trials. One was tried at York Assizes on the 27th of July 1612, and another died in prison. Of the 11 who went to trial, 9 women and 2 men, 10 were found guilty and executed by hanging, and 1 was found not guilty. The official publication of the proceedings by the Clerk to the Court, Thomas Potts, in his The Wonderful Discovery of Witches in the County of Lancaster, and the number of witches hanged together, 9 at Lancaster and 1 at York, make the trials unusual for England at the time. It has been estimated that all the English witch trials between the early 15th and early 18th centuries resulted in fewer than 500 executions. This series of trials accounts for more than 2% of that total. 6 of the Pendle witches came from one of 2 families, each at the time headed by a woman in her 80s. Elizabeth Southerns, aka Demdike, her daughter Elizabeth Device, and her grandchildren James and Alison Device. Anne Whittle, aka Chattox, and her daughter Anne Redfern. The others accused were Jane Bulcock and her son John Bulcock, Alice Nutter, Catherine Hewitt, Alice Gray, and Janet Preston. The outbreaks of witchcraft in and around Pendle may suggest that some people made a living as traditional healers, using a mixture of herbal medicine and talismans or charms, which might leave them open to charges of sorcery. Many of the allegations resulted from accusations that members of the Demdike and Chattox families made both against each other, perhaps because they were in competition trying to make a living from healing, begging, and extortion. The accused witches lived in the area around Pendle Hill in Lancashire, a county which at the end of the 16th century was regarded by the authorities as a wild and lawless region, an area fabled for its theft, violence, and sexual laxity, where the church was honoured without much understanding of its doctrines by the common people. The nearby Cistercian Abbey at Whalley had been dissolved by Henry VIII in 1537, a move strongly resisted by the local people, over whose lives the abbey had until then exerted a powerful influence. Despite the abbey's closure and the execution of its abbot, the people of Pendle remained largely faithful to their Roman Catholic beliefs and were quick to revert to Catholicism on Queen Mary's ascension to the throne in 1533. When Mary's Protestant half-sister Elizabeth came to the throne in 1558, Catholic priests once again had to go into hiding, but in remote areas such as Pendle, they continued to celebrate Mass in secret. In 1562, early in her reign, Elizabeth passed a law in the form of the Witchcraft Act of 1562. This demanded the death penalty, but only where harm had been caused. Lesser offences were punishable by a term of imprisonment. The Act provided that anyone who should use, practice, or exercise any witchcraft, enchantment, charm, or sorcery, whereby any person shall happen to be killed or destroyed, was guilty of a felony without benefit of clergy and was to be put to death. On Elizabeth's death in 1603, she was succeeded by James I. Strongly influenced by Scotland's separation from the Catholic Church during the Scottish Reformation, James was intensely interested in Protestant theology, focusing much of his curiosity on the theology of witchcraft. By the early 1590s, he had become convinced that he was being plotted against by Scottish witches. After a visit to Denmark, he had attended the trial in 1590 of the North Berwick witches, who were convicted of using witchcraft to send a storm against the ship that carried James and his wife Anne back to Scotland. In 1597, he wrote a book, Demonology, instructing his followers that they must denounce and prosecute any supporters or practitioners of witchcraft. 1 year after James acceded to the English throne, a law was enacted imposing the death penalty in cases where it was proven that harm had been caused through the use of magic or corpses had been exhumed for magical purposes. James was, however, sceptical of the evidence presented in witch trials, even to the extent of personally exposing discrepancies in the testimonies presented against some accused witches. In early 1612, the year of the trials, every justice of the peace in Lancashire was ordered to compile a list of recusants in their area, i.e. those who had refused to attend the English church and to take communion, a criminal offence at the time. Roger Nowell of Reed Hall, on the edge of Pendle Forest, was the Justice of Peace for Pendle. It was against this background of seeking out religious nonconformists that, in March 1612, Nowell investigated a complaint made to him by the family of John Law, a pedlar, who claimed to have been injured by witchcraft. Many of those who subsequently became implicated as the investigation progressed did indeed consider themselves to be witches, in the sense of being village healers who practiced magic, probably in return for payment, but such men and women were common in 16th century rural England, an accepted part of village life. It was perhaps difficult for the judges charged with hearing the trials, Sir James Altham and Sir Edward Bromley, to understand King James's attitude towards witchcraft. The king was the head of the judiciary, and Bromley was hoping for promotion to a circuit nearer to London. Altham was nearing the end of his judicial career, but he had recently been accused of a miscarriage of justice at the York Assizes, which had resulted in a woman being sentenced to death by hanging for witchcraft. The judges may have been uncertain whether the best way to gain the king's favour was by encouraging convictions or by sceptically testing the witnesses to destruction. One of the accused, Demdike, had been regarded in the area as a witch for 50 years, and some of the deaths the witches were accused of had happened many years before Roger Nowell started to take an interest in 1612. The event that seems to have triggered Nowell's investigation, culminating in the Pendle witch trials, occurred on the 21st of March 1612. On her way to Chawdon Forest, Demdike's granddaughter, Alison Device, encountered John Law, a pedlar from Halifax, and asked him for some pins. 17th century metal pins were handmade and relatively expensive, but they were frequently needed for magical purposes, such as in healing, particularly for treating warts, divination, and for love magic, which may have been why Alison was so keen to get hold of them and why Law was so reluctant to sell them to her. Whether she meant to buy them, as she claimed, and Law refused to undo his pack for such a small transaction, or whether she had no money and was begging for them, as Law's son Abraham claimed, is unclear. According to the 1613 tract Potts' Discovery of Witches, the devil appeared in the likeness of a black or brown dog with fiery eyes, which Janet Device later claimed was a spirit familiar of her grandmother named Ball, which spoke twice in English, offering to lame him. A few minutes after the encounter with Alison Device, she said she saw Law stumble and fall, apparently lame, perhaps because she had suffered a stroke. He managed to regain his feet and reach a nearby inn. Initially, Law made no accusations against Alison, but she appears to have been convinced of her own powers. When Abraham Law took her to visit his father a few days after the incident, she reportedly confessed and asked for his forgiveness. Alison Device, her mother Elizabeth, and her brother James were summoned to appear before Nowell on the 30th of March 1612. Alison confessed that she had sold her soul to the devil and that she had told him to lame John Law after he had called her a thief. Her brother James stated that his sister had also confessed to bewitching a local child. Elizabeth was more reticent, admitting only that her mother Demdike had a mark on her body, something that many, including Nowell, would have regarded as being left by the devil after he had sucked her blood. When questioned about Anne Whittle or Chattox, the matriarch of the other family reputedly involved in witchcraft in and around Pendle, Alison perhaps saw an opportunity for revenge. There may have been bad blood between the two families, possibly dating from 1601, when a member of the Chattox's family broke into Malkin Tower, the home of the Devices, and stole goods worth about £1, equivalent to about £215 as of 2023. Alison accused Chattox of murdering 4 men by witchcraft and of killing her father, John Device, who had died in 1601. She claimed that her father had been so frightened of old Chattox that he had agreed to give her £8 or 3.6 kilograms of oatmeal each year in return for her promise not to hurt his family. The meal was handed over annually until the year before John's death. On his deathbed, John claimed that his sickness had been caused by Chattox because they had not paid for protection. On the 2nd of April 1612, Demdike, Chattox, and Chattox's daughter Anne Redfern were summoned to appear before Nowell. Both Demdike and Chattox were then blind and in their 80s, and both provided Nowell with damaging confessions. Demdike claimed that she had given her soul to the devil 20 years previously, and Chattox that she had given her soul to a thing like a Christian man on his promise that she would not lack anything and would get any revenge she desired. Although Anne Redfern made no confession, Demdike said that she had seen her making clay figures. Margaret Crook, another witness seen by Nowell that day, claimed that her brother had fallen sick and died after having a disagreement with Redfern, and that he had frequently blamed her for his illness. Based on the evidence and confessions that he had obtained, Nowell committed Demdike, Chattox and Redfern and Alison Device to Lancaster jail to be tried for maleficium, causing harm by witchcraft, at the next assizes. The committal and subsequent trial of the 4 women might have been the end of the matter had it not been for a meeting organised by Elizabeth Device at Malkin Tower, home of the Demdikes, held on Good Friday, 10th of April 1612. To feed the party, James Device stole a neighbour's sheep. Friends and others sympathetic to the family attended, and when word of it reached Roger Nowell, he decided to investigate. On the 27th of April 1612, an inquiry was held before Nowell and another magistrate, Nicholas Bannister, to determine the purpose of the meeting at Malkin Tower, who had attended and what had happened there. As a result of the inquiry, 8 more people were accused of witchcraft and committed for trial. Elizabeth Device, James Device, Alice Nutter, Catherine Hewitt, John Bulcock, Jane Bulcock, Alice Gray and Janet Preston. Preston lived across the border in Yorkshire, so she was sent for trial at York Assizes. The others were sent to Lancaster jail to join the 4 already imprisoned there. Malkin Tower is believed to have been near the village of Newchurch in Pendle, or in Blacko on the site of present-day Malkin Tower Farm, and to have been demolished soon after the trials. Surveys point to 2 large rectangular anomalies that were found to be clay-floored farm buildings dating to the early 17th century at Malkin Tower Farm. The name Malkin has apparently been attached to the site since the 1500s. The evidence seems to discount an earlier belief that Malkin Tower was located close to Lower Black Moss Reservoir near Barley after a 17th century cottage with a mummified cat sealed in the walls was discovered by water engineers in 2011. The Pendle witches were tried in a group that also included the Samlesbury witches, Jane Southworth, Janet Brearley and Ellen Brearley, the charges against whom included child murder, cannibalism. Margaret Pearson, the so-called Padiham witch, who was facing her 3rd trial for witchcraft, this time for killing a horse, and Isabel Roby from Windle, accused of using witchcraft to cause sickness. Some of the accused Pendle witches, such as Alison Device, seem to have genuinely believed in their guilt, but others protested their innocence to the end. Janet Preston was the first to be tried at York Assizes. Janet Preston lived in Gisborne, which was then in Yorkshire. Her judges were Sir James Altham and Sir Edward Bromley. Janet was charged with the murder by witchcraft of a local landowner, Thomas Lister of Westby Hall, to which she pleaded not guilty. She had already appeared before Bromley in 1611, accused of murdering a child by witchcraft, but had been found not guilty. The most damning evidence given against her was that when she had been taken to see Lister's body, the corpse bled fresh blood presently in the presence of all that were present after she touched it. According to a statement made to Nowell by James Device on the 27th of April, Janet had attended the Malkin Tower meeting to seek help with Lister's murder. She was found guilty and sentenced to death by hanging. Her execution took place on the 29th of July in Knavesmire, the present site of York Racecourse. All the others accused lived in Lancashire, so they were sent to Lancaster Assizes for trial, where the judges were once again Altham and Bromley. The prosecutor was the local magistrate, Roger Nowell, who had been responsible for collecting the various statements and confessions from the accused. 9-year-old Janet Device was a key witness for the prosecution, something that would have not been permitted in any other 17th century criminal trial. However, King James had made a case for suspending the normal rules of evidence for witchcraft trials in his demonology. As well as identifying those who had attended the Malkin Tower meeting, Janet also gave evidence against her mother, brother and sister. 9 of the accused, Alison Device, Elizabeth Device, James Device, Anne Whittle, Anne Redfern, Alice Nutter, Catherine Hewitt, John Bulcock and Jane Bulcock, were found guilty during the 2-day trial and hanged at Gallows Hill in Lancaster on the 20th of August 1612. Elizabeth Southerns died while awaiting trial. Only one of the accused, Alice Gray, was found not guilty. Anne Whittle was accused of the murder of Robert Nutter. She pleaded not guilty, but the confession she had made to Roger Nowell, likely under torture, was read out in court, and the evidence against her was presented by James Robinson, who had lived with the Chattox family 20 years earlier. He claimed to remember that Nutter had accused Chattox of turning his beer sour, and that she was commonly believed to be a witch. Chattox broke down and admitted her guilt, calling on God for forgiveness and the judges to be merciful to her daughter, Anne Redfern. Elizabeth Device was charged with the murders of James Robinson, John Robinson, and together with Alice Nutter and Demdike, the murder of Henry Mitten. Elizabeth Device steadfastly maintained her innocence. Potts recorded that this odious witch suffered from a facial deformity resulting in her left eye being set lower than her right. The main witness against Device was her daughter, Janet, who was about 9 years old. When Janet was brought into the courtroom and asked to stand up and give evidence against her mother, Elizabeth, confronted with her own child making accusations that would lead to her execution, began to curse and scream at her daughter, forcing the judges to have her removed from the courtroom before the evidence could be heard. Janet was placed on a table and stated that she believed her mother had been a witch for 3 or 4 years. She also said that her mother had a familiar called Ball who had appeared in the shape of a brown dog. Janet claimed to have witnessed conversations between Ball and her mother in which Ball had been asked to help with various murders. James Device also gave evidence against his mother, saying that he had seen her making a clay figure of one of her victims, John Robinson. Elizabeth Device was found guilty. James Device pleaded not guilty to the murders by witchcraft of Anne Townley and John Duckworth. However, he, like Chattox, had made an earlier confession to Nowell, which was read out in court. That and the evidence presented against him by his sister Janet, who said that she had seen her brother asking a black dog he had conjured up to help him kill Townley, was sufficient to persuade the jury to find him guilty. The trials of the 3 Samlesbury witches were heard before Anne Redfern's first appearance in court, late in the afternoon, charged with the murder of Robert Nutter. The evidence against her was considered unsatisfactory, and she was acquitted. Anne Redfern was not so fortunate the following day when she faced her second trial for the murder of Robert Nutter's father, Christopher, to which she had pleaded not guilty. Demdike's statement to Nowell, which accused Anne of having made clay figures of the Nutter family, was read out in court. Witnesses were called to testify that Anne was a witch more dangerous than her mother, but she refused to admit her guilt to the end and had given no evidence against any others of the accused. Anne Redfern was found guilty. Jane Bulcock and her son John Bulcock, both from Newchurch and Pendle, were accused and found guilty of the murder by witchcraft of Janet Dean. Both denied that they had attended the meeting at Malcolm Tower, but Janet Device identified Jane as having been one of those present, and John as having turned the spit to roast the stolen sheep, the centrepiece of the Good Friday meeting at the Demdikes' home. Alice Nutter was unusual among the accused in being comparatively wealthy, the widow of a tenant yeoman farmer. She made no statement either before or during her trial except to enter her plea of not guilty to the charge of murdering Henry Mitten by witchcraft. The prosecution alleged that she, together with Demdike and Elizabeth Device, had caused Mitten's death after he refused to give Demdike a penny that she had begged from him. The only device against Alice seems to have been that James Device claimed Demdike had told him of the murder, and Janet Device in her statement said that Alice had been present at the Malcolm Tower meeting. Alice may have called in the meeting at Malcolm Tower on her way to a secret and illegal Good Friday Catholic service and refused to speak for fear of incriminating her fellow Catholics. Many of the Nutter family were Catholics, and 2 had been executed as Jesuit priests, John Nutter in 1584 and his brother Robert in 1600. Alice Nutter was found guilty. Catherine Hewitt, aka Moleheels, was charged and found guilty of the murder of Anne Foles. She was the wife of a clothier and had attended the meeting at Malcolm Tower with Alice Gray. According to the evidence given by James Device, both Hewitt and Gray told the others at that meeting that they had killed a child from Clone, Anne Foles. Janet Device also picked Catherine out of a lineup and confirmed her attendance at the Malcolm Tower meeting. Alice Gray was accused with Catherine Hewitt of the murder of Anne Foles. Potts does not provide an account of Alice Gray's trial, simply recording her as one of the Samlesbury witches, which she was not, as she was one of those identified as having been at the Malcolm Tower meeting, and naming her in the list of those found not guilty. Alison Device, whose encounter with John Law had triggered the events leading up to the trials, was charged with causing harm by witchcraft. Uniquely among the accused, Alison was confronted in court by her alleged victim, John Law. She seems to have genuinely believed in her own guilt. When Law was brought into court, Alison fell to her knees and confessed in tears. She was found guilty.
If you like that, then check out our Patreon, where for just $5 a month you get access to exclusive shows like Real Monsters and Playing with Bones with Amy Rose, along with early access to all our minisodes and ad-free access to the Weekend Update and It's Alive Alive! Not convinced yet? Well, head on over now and have 7 days on us. That's a 7-day free trial for all new members. That's It's Alive Alive Pod on Patreon. It's Alive Alive! All the guts and go with none of the guilt. See you on Wednesdays, unless you're on Patreon when you get us all week long.